today. My name is Jennifer Gill, and I'm the Director of Global Product Marketing. And today we have a really nice webinar for you with Forrester, and we're talking about accelerating data protection with disaster recovery as a service. So here's our agenda. So we'll do some speaker introductions really quick, and then I will turn it over to Henry, who's going to talk about Forrester and data protection market overview, looking at challenges for end users and cloud providers in the space, the opportunity, and some recommendations. And then I'm going to go through Zerto virtual replication and how it really is a great platform to launch your disaster recovery as a service initiative, and how there are specific features in there that help you simplify the relationship with your customer to make things really easy for you. So as I mentioned, I have Henry Baltazar, Senior Analyst with Forrester Research. So he has been working with infrastructure and operations professionals. He's been working with storage quite intimately and software as well for more than 15 years. He's also worked as an industry analyst and a journalist. And he spends a lot of time advising clients in terms of data center infrastructure technologies. Actually, he was just working with a client all day yesterday. And my name is Jennifer Gill. As I mentioned, I'm the Director of Global Product Marketing at Zerto. Prior to joining Zerto, I was at EMC, and I worked on the launch of VC. Okay, so at this time, I am going to turn it over to Henry. Actually, really quick before I turn it over to Henry, I forgot a critical housekeeping thing. We are going to take questions. So if you would like to ask a question, in the panel that showed up for me on the right-hand side of my screen, you'll see there's a questions tab, and you can type in questions there. And we're saving 10 minutes at the end specifically for those questions. So please, please ask away. We'd love to hear your questions. Okay, Henry, now I'll turn it over to you.
Oh, thanks a lot, Jennifer, and thank you all for joining me today. Today we're going to be talking obviously about disaster recovery as a service, which is a very new and emerging market, and it's a fantastic opportunity for a lot of cloud service providers and other people that want to be able to advance the industry. Thanks. So for today's presentation, really quickly, first section we're going to be talking a little bit about end user challenges and what are some of the opportunities for doing things in the DR space. Specifically in the second section we're going to talk about what exactly is disaster recovery as a service, how those types of offerings are going to come to fruition, and finally we're going to have a couple final recommendations on how to look at this market and take advantage of the opportunities. I think there's no surprise today when we look from the end user perspective, challenges, there's so many different challenges that your end user customers are trying to deal with at this point. With the data explosion, customers have so much more data that they're trying to retain and hold, and with compliance regulations and things like that, customers simply just can't get rid of data. So they need to find better ways of storing, protecting that data, and making sure that the data is available regardless of what can happen on their sites, which has really shown a much brighter spotlight on DR as a service. And in terms of application demands, we're going to go through this a little bit later in the study, but clearly one of the things we're seeing is that more and more applications are seen as business critical, and because of that, people need to find a better way besides just plain old backup to be able to protect and recover data. Other things that are major that we'll also need to address is with limited backup windows, people just can't afford to lose data and lose availability, and they need new methodologies to help figure out how to protect data in the long term. So, in a research survey we did in conjunction with Disaster Recovery Journal, I thought one of the most interesting things that we saw from the respondents was a very small percentage of applications in the respondents' environments were considered non-critical, only 29%. In contrast, the respondents themselves felt that 36% of their apps were business critical, while another 36% were mission critical, which goes to show if you look at a lot of these environments in your customer environments, a lot of what they have on the floor today is very important to them and needs to be able to function for the business and also for compliance and other reasons that we discussed earlier. Yeah. Oops, sorry. Sorry, I'm trying to move the slide back. Okay. So as far as some of the business concerns that we also see, for when we talked to respondents in the survey, we also found that recovery times and recovery points were actually going up for many of the respondents. It's also a clear sign that customers are at more risk at this point and need to find new ways of protecting data. Also, I think the other thing that's very interesting is there's so many different ways you could potentially lose availability. And while it's probably unlikely that you'll get affected by a terrorism event or chemical spill, there's a very high percentage chance that many of your customers are going to be subject to a power failure or IT hardware failure, which will force them, to, if they don't have DR as a service, would cause them to lose functionality of the applications and also prevent them from being able to service their customers quickly. So as far as the impact of disruption, not too many surprises here, but clearly one of the main things that you lose when you have an outage that's unplanned from a disaster is employee productivity, which 72% of people really felt was a major detriment to an outage. I think other opportunities that you look at also make a lot of sense is potential lost revenue, especially if you're talking about customers in e-commerce sites, and also loss of customer confidence. Many of your customers may be content providers or maybe providing other services that their clients are relying on. If there's downtime and they're unable to service their customers, that's definitely going to be a major impact for them in the long run. As far as DR testing goes, we definitely see more people, the people that already have DR in place, a lot of them are looking to do testing in terms of making sure that while they built DR, they're trying to test it a couple times a year at least to be able to make sure that DR plans that they put in place will be effective when push comes to shove and they actually need to flip the switch to go into failover mode. I think the alarming part, though, is when we look at what people should be doing in terms of having updates, continuous updates of their DR plan, at this point, a very small percentage of customers can actually have the ability to do continuous DR planning. And because of that, I think that's a major issue and a major gap that customers are trying to solve today. For those that have traditional DR or are doing DR on their own, something they're trying to solve today, and it's an area where DR as a service can eventually provide a benefit. So as far as some of the other drivers that are pushing customers to look at DR as a service and investigate better data protection, clearly regulatory and legal drivers have been a major reason for this. In the survey we found that 38 to 43% of a lot of the respondents, 30% in the most recent survey, cited that as a major reason for why they had to do resiliency. As we mentioned earlier, responsibility to stay online and fiduciary responsibilities are also major reasons why customers want to look at DR as a service and need to find better ways to keep their applications up. Based on what we've also seen, another reason why people are investigating now is a lot of the customers right now have identified that there's increased risk that things can happen, especially with many events we had, such as Superstorm Sandy and many of the other different things that have happened in the last couple of years that have caused outages on a geographic scale. Because of a lot of these events and because a fair amount of people have already suffered through downtime and outages, the time is definitely now to be able to look at some of these technologies. So in terms of what DR as a service is and why I think it's important, to me, I think the major aspect of this is when you look at what's been available today, from a data protection perspective, we've had strong offerings in terms of some of the low-cost type things, in terms of using tape and off-site tape and backup to be able to provide DR. But the problem with that is if you go to those types of technologies, you wind up having recovery points and recovery times in the scale of days, which is really not acceptable for a lot of companies, even the smaller ones. On the far end, while it is possible to get very, very low RPOs and RTOs using synchronous replication and traditional DR and high availability sites, those offerings are just really, really expensive, and at this point, they're not a viable choice for many of the customers in the mid-range and even in some of the enterprise cases, especially those that don't have the staffing to have secondary sites and don't necessarily want to make the expensive investment in proprietary hardware to be able to deploy those correctly. To us, we believe disaster recovery as a service and backup as a service, and a lot of these cloud services that are coming to play are very important because they can potentially fill that gap between what we have with slow recovery with tape and the ultra-high availability but expensive synchronous replication offerings. Because I think because of this opportunity is very, very important, and it's an opportunity that can really solve a gap in protection for customers. Yeah, as I mentioned, just to go a little bit more deeper, for hot sites, things like the synchronous replication and the expensive offerings like that, it is possible to get the RPOs in under an hour or so. But obviously, by doing that, it's going to cost you a lot more money in terms of manpower resources and also other capabilities like that. I think one of the cool aspects of having disaster recovery service and having it given by a service provider is you'll be able to fill a lot more of these gaps in terms of being able to provide things like a warm cloud site or even a cold cloud site, since as a service provider, you could set aside those resources for your customers to be able to enact when they need them, but not necessarily have to force them to have a secondary staff member on that second geographic location just to be able to flip the switch and make sure operations go forward when there is a disaster. So I think in terms of the scale of importance for business continuity and disaster recovery, there's no doubt that this is one of the key areas that customers are looking to have better coverage and better deployment of solutions. I think it's very telling when we look at things like virtualization. Usually the first thing that comes to mind is people are using virtualization to provide on-demand capacity and do a better job of resource allocation. But what was really surprising to me is as we started looking at some of the survey data, the need to improve data protection and improve business continuity and DR actually rated second in class, which is very high compared to all the other reasons why people are looking at virtualization. So in effect, we're at a point where DR and business continuity service is one of the top reasons why customers are looking to virtualize today. As far as looking at the interest from enterprises and SMBs, we've steadily seen an increase in interest in this type of technology, in cloud-based resiliency offerings, and for the most part, relatively small percent of customers are not interested or don't know if they want to use DR as a service at this point. For some customers, one of the initial offerings that they're looking to do is something like a do-it-yourself cloud-based DR. In this type of scenario, the customer maintains their own production site and winds up going to a public cloud provider, maybe an Amazon or somebody like that, to replicate their workloads and have Amazon or the other cloud provider wind up being the target resource in the case of a disaster. So in the case of a disaster, obviously you see the resources flip over. While this is a potential offering for DR customers, there's definitely some drawbacks there, and there's definitely some areas where, as a cloud service provider, you can emphasize how you could do this better than customers who are doing do-it-yourself type implementations. I think the main thing to see here is the failover itself is going to be manual still. Customers are going to have to be able to do the failover themselves. You're going to have the required staff to be able to figure out how exactly they want to deploy it on both sides of the house. On the public cloud provider side, you need to make sure you work with them to have a guaranteed capacity that they can take over for your workloads if something happens. While that may seem like a trivial type of allocation, it really isn't if you start to think about what happens if it's a larger scale disaster and many other people are trying to use those resources at the same time. There could be some contention issues, and I think that's an area where DR as a service providers can provide some guarantees about allocations of resources in the case that something does happen to their customers. I think the other aspect in terms of some of the areas of value you can provide is, the transition from on-premise site to a cloud site, could require a transformation, from physical to virtual, especially if they don't have virtualization in all their environments on the back-end side. And because of that, that could be another opportunity for DR as a service providers to provide some value-added services. Going forward, in terms of how we believe cloud service providers can take advantage of this, DR as a service can be deployed in a number of flexible ways, which I think are very interesting. Probably the most lightweight, easiest way of doing it is through deployment replication, which is something that Zerto is going to be talking about later in this discussion. That in addition to replication, there are also vendors that are providing appliances that are providing the backup and that are providing the replication and the DR as a service facility to copy the data back to the cloud provider standby site. Basically how this works, production data center works with the replication to move the data to the cloud provider's standby site, and in the event of an outage, just as we saw earlier, the workloads will move from one side to the other seamlessly. And I think one of the other key aspects of this from a disaster recovery provider side is the ability to fail back, which many of these providers can, many of the technologies can help customers do to make sure that when there is a failback, it's a seamless migration backwards. Another emerging area which we're starting to see is with more and more data going to cloud, customers are still very cautious, and they definitely understand that even if I decide to put my data in the cloud, I may still need to have a backup to make sure that in the event of somebody deleting, an employee accidentally deleting a file, or something actually happens on the cloud side, maybe your public provider does something to your data that corrupts data. In the event of that happening, there's going to be opportunities for customers to, as a service provider, there's going to be opportunities for you to help those customers those cloud customers have a secondary target, which can potentially be used to take over and help restore data in the event that something happens on a cloud provider site. So as far as recommendations go, I think one key thing to look at on the end user side is, for many of them, I'm just going to build out the slide. It's easier here. For many of the customers, I think one of the main problems they have is, what's interesting about cloud opportunity is with the DR as a service type offering and some of these clouds you can create, it still has the same cloud sensibilities in terms of pay-as-you-go access. One of the main problems that customers have is they want to be able to have this better functionality at less cost, and they need to make sure that they're not constantly paying for a VM that's not doing anything. They don't want to pay for a standby VM that's sitting on another site that's not doing anything and have to consume resources for something like that. So I think one of the key benefits that you can emphasize to DR as a service clients is, with a deployment like this, you have a little to very minimal upfront investment and be able to deploy this. I think the other aspect that's really interesting with the virtualization technologies that are available today is, with these on-demand resources, it becomes a lot easier to do testing, which is what we mentioned earlier, is what customers were interested in doing, to try to facilitate, to make sure, and from their peace of mind, that DR things put in place will be able to take advantage of technologies when you actually need to use it. The other aspect with cloud is the ability to have more short-term contracts and the ability to get to the market faster. While traditional DR is usually a very expensive type of offering, it requires a long lock-in time to really get to the ROI. One of the nice examples of being able to have a cloud-based service is the ability to start these up relatively quickly and go into a cloud environment and provide that protection without spending many, many months doing planning and lots of other things, locking the customer in. As we mentioned earlier, pay-as-you-go pricing is another key attribute going to the cloud. As far as the barriers, I think the main thing is really talking to the customers about the status quo. A lot of them believe, some of them are doing DR in-house today and already have sunken costs in terms of facilities and procedures that they use to do things. And a lot of them are also thinking that they may not have the budget to do this. But I think this is where you can bring in the flexibility aspects of cloud. It's not like traditional DR as a service. It's not like having to go out and lease another site and have identical equipment on both sides of the fence, which is the third guideline we're seeing. And I think one of the main reasons why DR and business continuity was so expensive before is With traditional types of settings, you have to have identical configurations, you have to have identical machines on both sides, and different procedures. Virtualization has been a great equalizer in that sense, and that's part of the reason why this is such an important opportunity to be able to take advantage of this point. I think another concern that customers can have is regarding bandwidth. Like, do they have enough bandwidth to be able to move this data to another site, and do they have enough bandwidth to make sure that the data is updated correctly? And I think that's another reason where you want to make sure when you're looking at the vendors you partner with, will have technology such as compression and WAN optimization to make sure they're making the best use of bandwidth, so you can reduce the need to have network upgrades on their site to be able to move the workloads over. Another thing that is another concern, and also another area where DR as a service providers can provide differentiation, is in regards to security. For a lot of cloud environments, security and data sovereignty are still an issue, but to me, that's an opportunity for DR as a service providers and cloud providers, because that's an opportunity for you to go to your portfolio and discuss why your data centers are more resilient, why your data centers are more secure, and also for some geographic locations, as I mentioned, with sovereignty issues. Some customers really, depending on what country they're in, they may not be able to use a cloud provider, because if that point of presence is hosted outside their country, that might not meet the regulations. So I think that locality aspect is another aspect which cloud service providers can really leverage to be able to maintain their partnerships and show value. In terms of the feature, I think for us today, the main thing we're seeing is, while before there were very distinct disaster recovery, high availability, and backup silos of data protection with environments, I think we're moving more towards what we're calling business technology resiliency. Moving away from these different silos and really trying to find a more comprehensive way to do the data protection while also providing continuity, so that these different layers are more efficient and you're not wasting as much money on the different capabilities to be able to protect data and make it available. To me, I think one of the other interesting aspects of DR as a service is, in fact, if you look at DR as a service, it really is a hybrid cloud deployment. It is a great way for you to extend the reach of your cloud to your on-premise customers. Forrester believes that hybrid cloud is going to be the future. If you look at a lot of the different surveys and all the data that's been made available, while public cloud is definitely expanding, many of your customers still want to have data held locally, and they want to have some local resources. With a resource like, with a service like DR as a service, you can create a potential bridge to be able to have an aggregation point on your customer side, which will seamlessly start moving data back to you. And I think that in effect can be a very powerful offering that can help accelerate your businesses and help you extend your reach into the cloud. Thanks. So with that, I'm going to switch over to Jennifer.
Okay, great. Thanks, Henry. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about Zerto and how we can help you deliver disaster recovery services to your customers. So you heard Henry kind of review the barriers to cloud to offer disaster recovery services, and it's really in terms of the infrastructure, the complexity, and there's no multi-tenancy available in most solutions that are available today. So customers will come to you, they'll have NetApp, they'll have EMC, they'll have Dell, they'll have Pure Storage, they'll have all these different kinds of hardware arrays in their environment. And that means that you have to have a NetApp array, an EMC array, a Dell storage array, or a Pure Storage array in your environment. So it makes things really difficult for you in terms of the management, because of course each one has their own user interface. So this is not multi-tenant. It's very complex, and it drives up your costs in terms of your infrastructure, because now you have to have matching arrays, and also your operational costs, because now you have to have an expert in each one of these areas. And with Zerto, and this is complex and flexible, expensive, and really it's not feasible. I mean, you can't really have dedicated teams per hardware array, per SLA, et cetera. It just gets too complicated. So with Zerto, we do replication at the VM level. We replicate VMs and VMDKs, not LUNs. So it's a software-based solution. You can replicate from these different types of arrays to your VMware environment. And now you have a very simple, scalable, and complete software solution. So it makes things much easier in your environment. You don't have to have an expert for each kind of storage array. You can build your environment on the array that you are comfortable using and then design your services around that. So we don't want any hardware dependencies. It's also natively multi-tenant. So you can replicate from all your customer sites to that one shared infrastructure. So when we really consider ourselves the platform for cloud services, so here it just gives you a little bit better idea in terms of the multi-tenancy. There's a couple of platforms here for management. So we have the Zerto Cloud Manager, and that's going to overlay and manage all the resources between you and your customer sites. So you can see everything at a, across your cloud environment and also on a per customer basis if that's what you prefer. If you happen to have a portal already built for your customers, we also have the Zerto self-service portal. So this is just an out-of-the-box portal that you can use to offer disaster recovery services very quickly. It does still require some integration work. You don't have to every day of integration, but that's much less than the days, weeks, maybe months it takes to build your disaster recovery portal, and provide another option. Here you're able to just integrate it in to what you have as your existing environment. And one of the things that Henry mentioned was, in terms of end user being able to do testing. So we have automated failover, failback, and recovery. So once you set something up called a virtual protection group, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a couple of slides. Once your customer declares, it's very easy for them to fail over to your environment. So, and you can manage that for them, or there is the ability to give them that level of control if that's the service model that you'd like to run. And we also have non-disruptive testing. So you're able to do testing within to like a bubble network within your infrastructure, giving the customer a very high degree of confidence that when they fail over to your cloud environment, it is going to work. And it's very simple. It's one click to test. While the testing is being executed, replication is still occurring. There's no interruption in replication. And in the off chance that you're running a test with one of your customers and they happen to need to really fail over due to a power outage or if they patched something and it didn't work correctly, you can stop the test and then do the actual failover. Oh, and failback is also just a checkbox back, and then you can fail over as well. Other solutions, it can be quite a bit more complicated. And then lastly, we have Zerto Offsite Backup. So this enables you to take a full backup of an application. You can have that local, so within your cloud, or you can do that to a third site within your cloud environment. So customer onboarded with no disruptions. So to get a customer set up with cloud services can be really challenging. Maybe you need to install some hardware. Maybe you need to reconfigure their applications and things like that. And many customers aren't particularly happy with that because they've already very carefully architected their applications to leverage their IT infrastructure in the best way possible. Other services, they'll come in and say, oh, you're going to need to move this VM over to this storage. This is going to need to go over here. We need all these VMs to point to a particular one. And that doesn't really work well for customers. Zerto is very, very simple in terms of onboarding. So you install a Zerto Virtual Manager on each customer site. As you can see, it plugs right into vCenter. And that's going to push out a Zerto Virtual Replication Appliance per ESX host. We've completed the installation in as fast as 30 minutes, but we claim, under an hour. So it's a very, very simple onboarding process. Applications don't need to be reconfigured. It's a very, very light impact to your end customers. And that's very attractive to them because now like, now you have my attention. I can be up and running in a couple of days. I don't need to, a couple hours rather. I don't need to reconfigure my environment. Now it seems feasible. Now we've kind of lowered one of the barriers to entry for them. So when end users care about application protection, so I'm just going to run that one more time. So you have all the VMs on the left side. So you can see that they're kind of scattered throughout the environment. Zerto has something called a virtual protection group, and what it does is no matter where they were in the environment on the left, How it's represented on the right is how Zerto Virtual Replication will see those. You'll see all those VMs related to the SAP application. You'll see all the VMs related to Oracle. You'll see all the VMs related to Exchange. So this enables the customer to get very comfortable in terms of application service levels, and it ensures application consistency in terms of the recovery. Because again, when a customer comes to you and says, hey, I need to recover that table space, that's not what they're going to say. They're going to say, I can't get into Oracle, I can't get into SAP. So now you're able to deliver protection in a language that the customer understands at the application level. So automated reporting and billing makes things a lot easier in terms of your relationship with your customer. So we have something, as you can see there, called a recovery report. It's the one that says, I don't know if you can see, it has a table at the bottom and it says success in green. So that is going to show each step within the recovery process and then the time it takes to recover. So auditors at customers are very happy to see this report because now they can go back and say, hey, you know, we did our recovery because of the automation that's in the application in this service. We're able to get a recovery time objective of 8 minutes, 15 minutes. I've seen customers with it as low as 2 minutes. So this is going to enable you to really measure against the service level agreement you have with your customers and ensure the very aggressive recovery time objective. Zerto also uses continuous block level replication, and that gives you very aggressive recovery point objectives. So I have customers who see things within the 10 to 20 second range typically for a recovery point objective. Oh, and just one more thing on the reports. So because it's automated, you're able to do this at the customer level. So there's no manual coordination with an Excel spreadsheet across your couple of sites that they might be accessing if you're a cloud provider who has 2, 3, 4 sites. So this automatically rolls everything up. So now you can see, okay, we're protecting 15, 30, 200 of your virtual machines. Here are the resources that they're using, and this is how we're going to need to bill for that. So when you come to a customer with an Excel spreadsheet that you've created, it can make them a little uncomfortable. Here it's automated so that they know, okay, now I know exactly what I'm using in terms of my disaster recovery service. So we have a great relationship with Cisco. We were part of their Intercloud announcement that was made in the first quarter of this year. And they have a virtualized multi-service data center. And that reference architecture includes Zerto Virtual Replication. So it's a really nice overview of how to leverage Zerto and Cisco solutions together to build a very robust disaster recovery as a service offering. So in just kind of winding down here, I do see I have a couple of questions, which is fantastic. But we provide an enterprise class cloud platform to deliver a complete set of cloud services. So what I mean by that is, one, very fast customer onboarding. Install seamlessly into the infrastructure. There are no hardware requirements. All they need is to have VMware vSphere. If you're a cloud provider who's built your environment with vCloud, also not a problem. We can replicate from a vSphere environment to a vCloud environment. Very aggressive service levels. So recovery time objectives of minutes, as I mentioned, recovery point objectives of seconds. So very, very aggressive service levels. And we have the protection at the level that the customer is looking for. We have protection at the application level. We also offer continuous data protection through the journal. So this gives you some historical information. So if you do have a customer who has an outage due to a logical failure, we provide some historical data that you can configure on a per customer basis. It's 1 hour up to 5 days worth of data, depending on the level of service you want to offer them. So they're able to use that historical information to go back. So and then just to show off, we do have a growing ecosystem. Things are growing quite well for us here over at Zerto. So we do have over 500 customers. We have over 150 cloud service providers and over 300 channel partners for them. So they're able to use that historical information to go back. So and then just to show off, we do have a growing ecosystem. Things are growing quite well for us here over at Zerto. So we do have over 500 customers. We have over 150 cloud service providers and over 300 channel partners So if you'd like to learn more, so next step, so we do proof of concepts, so where you can try out the software in your environment. And we'd love to do that, honestly. We'd love to see the simplicity and the powerful nature of Zerto Virtual Replication. So I put up Henry's contact information should you have any questions for him that you don't want to ask him right now. I also encourage you to follow him on Twitter. And then I included Sean Casey's contact information. He's our Director of Global Cloud Sales. I also included Mariah West. She runs all our partner programs, including our Cloud Service Provider program. And then, of course, myself, Jennifer Gill, if you have any questions that you don't want to ask me today, certainly feel free to email me. So I'm going to go to the question panel. Wow, we have many, many questions. So Henry, the first question is for you.
Hi, the first question that we had here was, what's the difference between business and mission critical? Obviously, if you look at both of those types of use cases, classifications and applications, they're both very important. The best way to describe it would be if something that's mission critical is a service or an application that if that's down, it has immediate business impact on your company. An example is this: I did an inquiry with a very large utilities company in the South. Anything that would have happened to their server systems would have knocked out a power grid. That's something that's mission critical. Something that I would describe as business critical would be, some of the applications you have in your environment that are very, very important and very important to the efficiency of your organization. That if they were down, you could still get by with your business. A good example of that would be things like some of the business intelligence type applications and some of your reporting applications. Well, it would be great to have those on all the time, but it's more critical for you to have the mission critical stuff first and make sure you still have a pathway to get business critical applications up as immediately as possible.
Okay, great. Thanks, Henry. So, and I think the next one is for you. It is, how do you compare active-active configuration with DRaaS?
So I think the best way to look at that is we had the chart earlier in terms of the big gap in the middle for cloud. Active configurations, that's going to be the best of the best, but it's also the most expensive. In an active configuration, the most classic example of that would be something like a stock exchange or something which is extremely transaction sensitive. Usually in those configurations you have identical hardware on both sides. You also have limits of distance. You can only be, in terms of the amount of distance it can be, it's usually a metro level distance where it's something like 30 kilometers or so is the maximum distance, because anything longer than that winds up being an issue in terms of the speed of light. So to me, the way I see disaster recovery as a service, it's a great way to fill the gap between really, really slow backup and while still providing something or providing RPO and RTO and more in the matter of minutes that's at a cost that's considerably less expensive than mission critical active-active configurations.
Okay. And then, Henry, we have a distinction between backup and replication as well that I'll highlight, but I was wondering from a Forrester perspective, what is the distinction between backup and replication in your framework?
We still see backup as in terms of backup in a local sense, backup in terms of making sure you're having a secondary copy of something on disk or tape on a local site. With replication, that's really where you start getting more into a higher level availability, and that's where you start seeing the capabilities of being able to get to DR as a service and true business continuity as a service, where you're not waiting pretty much an entire day to be able to launch systems again.
Yeah, we have a very similar distinction at Zerto because you can imagine, people say, well, what about this type of product, or it's a backup product? And backup and disaster recovery is not the same thing. Just to add to Henry's point, SLA is probably the biggest one. So we're talking in terms of recovery point objectives, seconds in terms of data loss. And in terms of making things available for end users, we're talking a recovery time objective of just a few minutes. And this is one of the great features of Zerto, that with all the automation, it's not just a disaster recovery solution. We don't consider it complete. Well, the data's over there. Now you need to make it usable. We want to make sure the data's at the target site, within the cloud, and usable very quickly for end users. So that's one of the key features of Zerto Virtual Replication, is that it's very aggressive in terms of service levels. And also backup, you'll find you can fail over, but you can't necessarily fail back really easily. So we have reverse protection and fail back. So it makes it easier that once production does come back up, you can move back to production simply and quickly. So Henry, I think this question is for you, but if you don't think so, just let me know. So it's with multi-tenancy, how do you address customer concerns with PCI HIPAA security requirements?
Yeah, I think that'd probably be, to me, I'm not a HIPAA and PCI expert. I think the ways that customers are doing it now is they're either doing isolation of hardware, where they have a separate segment for a customer's data that's specific PCI compliant and HIPAA compliant, and in some cases, if they can get right levels of certifications and with the organizations, we're starting to see encryption being used also as a means of being able to do that, especially if you have co-located data or if you have data that's residing on the same physical hardware.
Okay, great. And then a question for me. So can Zerto replicate any hypervisor-based system or only VMware? So right now we're just VMware. So VMware vSphere and VMware vCloud. We support VMware vSphere 4.x and higher. We are planning on supporting additional hypervisors by the end of the year. And we made an announcement in February, actually, that next hypervisor would be Hyper-V. And the goal is for the end of the year. Okay, and here is a question for Shannon Snowden. So those of you who may not be aware, we also have Shannon Snowden on the line from Zerto. He is our Senior Technical Marketing Architect. And this question is something that I cannot answer. So Shannon, you're showing the server recovery. What about the network and security infrastructure, load balancing, et cetera? Do any of these products tie into your portal?
Well, I think that it'd probably be the opposite. We tie into other portals via API, and the way that we designed our portal itself is to work with existing portals, since the nature of DR as a service has lagged behind the industry. So that's mostly the way that you would approach it with the combination of our standalone portal, but also with APIs in order to map into existing environments.
Okay, thanks, Shannon. And someone asked about a copy of the slides. So we are going to have this presentation posted on our website by the end of the week, so you'll be able to listen to the recording at your leisure. And Shannon, one more for you. So someone wrote back that PCI HIPAA question was actually for Zerto, and they're referring to the data streams encrypted, and in parentheses they put replication, are protected to meet regulatory requirements in a multi-tenant solution. So before Shannon answers from a technical perspective, I'll just mention that we do have many customers in the healthcare field and in retail who are using Zerto virtual replication to protect their environment. And so Shannon, I'll let you go on the technical details there.
Okay, so from a multi-tenant perspective, I think Henry really nailed it as far as the infrastructure itself via hardware, networking, is all constructed to be isolated and monitored and reported as far as meeting requirements. And the beauty of Zerto is that we just overlay right into an existing infrastructure like that. So if you have the network configuration encrypted between the customer and to your target data location, we're going to ride right inside of that. So we will play very nicely into what's already been deployed or a isolated for PCI HIPAA requirement types of multi-tenant deployments.
Okay, great. Okay, so Shannon, it looks like a follow-up for you on that same question. So I'm referring to a VRA. If it's shared between multiple customers, is there a way for data to be intercepted?
No, not really. But if you need to, what you could do in that instance is, since the VRAs are per host, you could possibly isolate the host per customer if they have enough VMs. So there are ways to isolate it down to individual customers if that's if you have a high level of security concern.
Okay. Shannon, one from you on the product side. Do you have to decrypt and encrypt during replication?
No, we're dependent on the underlying infrastructure for the encryption part.
Okay. And Shannon, another one for you. Are you requiring a VPN between us, a service provider, and the customer network to replicate?
Yes, yes we do.
Okay. And then another question, so do we have any plans, does Zerto have any plans to provide a DRaaS solution using Amazon as a target or VCHS? So Shannon, we can talk a little about 3.5 and that, and then I'll let you take it up.
Okay, so let's break it apart. To answer the first one with Amazon, with the 3.5 release, we do have the capability of using Amazon as an archival place, essentially. So we have the offsite backup feature, which goes into what Henry was talking about as far as the business technology resiliency, sort of the collapsing of the silos to where we're just focused on data protection. And that gets into several of the things that you'll see in their new products coming out. And one of them would be the first step is going to be able to use public clouds, if you want, for long-term archiving of the virtual protection groups, the VMs in them.
Okay, great. And then someone asked the question, is Zerto part of the VMware VCHS cloud offering? And we are not part of that offering. And we have just a couple more questions, so if you have any more, I would encourage you to ask them. So Henry, another question for you. So what is the opportunity for hybrid cloud as you see it?
Yeah, to me, I think all the research suggests that future clouds are going to be hybrid. You know, it's not going to be all-prem, it's not going to be all public or hosted private cloud or any of those other offerings. So to me, I think the interesting aspect of DR as a service is it truly is a hybrid cloud offering. You know, it is one of the best ways to be able to start bridging workloads on your customer side and bringing them into your side. You know, I think what's really powerful about this is you could start this out as something like, hey, we're providing you with business continuity and you know, DR as a service. But ultimately, what you're trying to facilitate is, in the future, is potentially maybe start using your cloud compute and other services you provide on your side once they have the ability to move their application and data to your facilities. So I think that's one of the interesting ways and one of many reasons why I think it's a good opportunity to look at this technology today and start figuring out how this can plug into your roadmaps going forward.
Okay, great. And just to add a little bit to that, so in Q1, along with us, when we were as part of the Cisco Intercloud announcement, and that's when kind of the hybrid cloud messaging started to come out, you know, we see Zerto as a key component of that because we're able to move workloads very seamlessly between different locations. And as someone asked earlier, you know, right now that is just between VMware vSphere environments, but that will be between different hypervisors as well. So now you know, the future is you would have the opportunity to have VMware vSphere, you know, within your environment, do disaster recovery service to a Hyper-V cloud provider, and then use Amazon for backup, or vice versa. You know, I'm sure many of the cloud providers on the call today have built their environment with VMware vSphere. This would then open up the opportunity for you to reach out to customers who have built their production infrastructures on Microsoft Hyper-V. So that would really open the opportunity up in terms of the available target market for disaster recovery as a service. So Shannon, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
No, I think you pretty much covered it. That's where we are.
Okay, great. So here's a question that Shannon and I get quite a bit, and I'll answer a part of it, and I'll send it over to Shannon to go a little bit deeper. But how do you compare with VMware vCenter Site Recovery Manager with Zerto? So, well, Site Recovery Manager is just the orchestration piece. There's no replication within that product. So you have to use vSphere replication or array-based replication. So and both of those kind of have drawbacks, whether it's service levels or limiting the benefits of virtualization, you know, depending on which stream you go down. Other more detailed issues around application consistency and also historical information. So Site Recovery Manager will store 24 historical points over a set period, whether that's 24 hours or a couple of days or however you've configured it within your environment, whereas Zerto is very granular. So it gives you 1 hour up to 5 days worth of information, and every couple of seconds you would have a point where you can recover to. So it gives you much more granularity in terms of where you can feel back to. And if you're talking about a customer's application that if it's down for an hour could lose $500,000, you know, every second really counts in that environment. So Shannon, anything to add there?
In this conversation, I think from a multi-tenant and a cloud provider and a disaster recovery as a service scenario, that is where Zerto really separates from Site Recovery Manager, because it does have the limitations, if you will, that you listed. But when you try to do it in a multi-tenant configuration, it really becomes not a suitable solution for cloud service providers. It's not a good experience either deploying or supporting.
Okay, great. So here's a question. Okay, so Shannon, I think the question's for you. So customer is using Zerto as well as needed to use Zerto DRaaS offering of the cloud provider, or is normal vCloud provider enough? I'm not sure if you can see that.
Yeah, I see it. I think what we're trying to do there is we want to make sure that we have Zerto components on both sides. We are not replacing the functionality of like vCloud and vCloud Director or vCAC or anything like that. We integrate with it. That's one of the things that the product does very, very well, is it just seamlessly integrates in with the existing management infrastructure and just augments it with the DR migration capability that Zerto specializes in.
Okay, great. So someone just chimed in the comments, so I'm going to read it. So not a question, but this person who's on the webinar just wanted to add that they're using Zerto to replicate workloads between London and the U.S. data centers, and it is a fantastic product. So thank you so much for that. And also, I'd encourage you to go to our website, look at customer quotes. You'll see a lot of great quotes from our customers. We have fantastic customers who are just so thrilled with the product. All right, so we have 2 more questions, and we have about 4 minutes left. So if you have anything else, we'll try to sneak them in. But Shannon, a networking question for you. Is the VPN connection being done at the customer/service provider, network/firewall, or being done by the Zerto appliance to the service provider?
It's actually done by the service provider. So when you implement Zerto, the requirements would be that the VPN connection is established.
Okay. And then Shannon, someone's looking for a little bit more detail on the journal that they've been reading about in the Zerto documentation.
Okay, I think what we could do is probably direct them with some. We've got the contact information, right? So we could send out some more decision points, tools, and things on how you size the journal and get it correct for the customer side, but also the cloud provider side, because there's different design criteria and things to consider depending on your perspective.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So that is our last question, and I want to make sure we're very respectful of everyone's time, so I don't want to go over. But again, thank you everyone for joining us today. I hope you found this very helpful to you. I know that the information I found from Henry to be very valuable for me personally. But Henry, thank you so much for spending some time with us today.
Well, thanks for having me today.
So yeah, absolutely. And Shannon, thank you for bailing me out on the networking questions. You know that's my area of weakness.
No problem. Thanks.
So, all right, and as I mentioned, everyone, please feel free to contact us. We'd love to hear from you, and we would really like to do a proof of concept with you. They're, at no charge, installs really, really quickly into your infrastructure, and they give you an opportunity to really see, the kind of services that you can build with Zerto. So thank you so much for your time today, and have a great day.